Hi, I'm Molly from the Scituate Reservoir Watershed Education Program, and today we're going to talk about what watersheds are and how they work. A watershed is simply all of the hills, valleys, and land that catch water after it rains or snows and eventually bring it down using gravity to the lowest point in the watershed. And that's usually going to be a stream, a lake, a river, or in some places, even the ocean. This is my watershed model here, and today we're going to pretend that my watershed model is the Scituate Reservoir watershed. So this blue area right here is going to represent the Scituate Reservoir. Now the Scituate Reservoir watershed is in parts of Scituate, Foster, Gloucester, and Johnston, Rhode Island, and it is the very special watershed that brings water to Rhode Island's largest drinking water supply. So the Scituate Reservoir provides the water that over 60% of Rhode Island residents drink, and that makes it an especially important watershed. Now, most of the land in the Scituate Reservoir watershed is either woods or farmland or other very rural, what we call land uses. Now, these land uses are great for water quality because when water falls in a forest or on some farmland, it is usually absorbed right into the ground where it can help replenish the groundwater wells that the people who live near the reservoir get their drinking water from. However, the watershed also has roads, parking lots, and businesses. These are an important part of our communities, but they can also cause some pollution. So in a watershed like the Scituate Reservoir watershed, where lots of people live and work, you might see types of pollution like oil and gasoline that leaks out of our cars, which we're going to represent with food coloring here. You also might see chemicals that people dump near their houses when they're done with them, not knowing that that's a bad idea to do. Now in the winter, we put lots of road salt on our roads. And unlike this table salt here, road salt has lots of other chemicals added into it. A lot of us have pets, both dogs and cats, and a lot of farm animals in our area. And those pets leave waste behind, which we're going to represent with coffee grounds. I know, it's a little bit silly. Now, whenever I'm driving down the road, if I look to the side, you'll usually see lots of trash. Unfortunately, a lot of people were not paying attention in school and still throw trash out the side of their cars and litter. A lot of us who have gardens and lawns put fertilizer on them, which we're going to represent with green food coloring. Fertilizer can be a useful tool, but if you use too much of it, the extra will wash away in a rainstorm and can cause pollution to our water. And even erosion, which is when soil washes away, when it's exposed, when there's nothing planted, especially when there's construction going on. Erosion is soil that's washed away by wind or water, and even though it is natural and comes from nature, it's a type of pollution when it ends up where it isn't supposed to be. So all of this pollution ended up on the ground because of the regular things that people do every day around their homes and communities. It's the type of pollution you might not give very much thought to. However, when there is a rainstorm, all of that pollution can be carried by the water over our pavement and our other waterproof surfaces and end up in the rivers and streams that lead to the Scituate Reservoir. We can demonstrate that now with my trusty spray bottle here. So when it rained, all of the pollution was carried with the water downhill and it ended up in the reservoir. This made the water look a lot dirtier and less safe to drink. Now we're very lucky that the Scituate Reservoir is currently very, very clean. And that's because the people who live and work near the reservoir are usually very careful to keep pollution off of the ground. So if you live or go to school in the Scituate Reservoir watershed, you can help by being careful what goes on the ground around your home and around your school, because it all could end up in the reservoir. Now, we're going to slide right over here and I'll show you how you can learn how watersheds work with things you can find around your own house. So to make a watershed with things I have around the house, I have, once again, my trusty spray bottle. I have a cookie sheet or any waterproof tray that can collect water. If you have an art tray, that's great. Some washable markers and some scrap paper. I used some paper that had some printing mistakes on it to recycle it. It doesn't need to be a fresh, clean piece of paper. Now to start, we are going to make our watershed, and making our watershed is pretty fun. We're going to take the paper and crumple it up into a little ball. Not so tight you can't undo it, but pretty tight. Then we're going to carefully find the four corners and uncrinkle the paper and put it on our tray. This is our watershed. Just like a real watershed, it's going to have high points. Those are the tops of hills. And it's also going to have low points. Those are the valleys and the lakes, whatever you would want to pretend that they are for your watershed. So now we can get a little bit creative. Or not, it's up to you. But I want you to find what you think is the lowest point on your watershed and color it in blue. We're going to pretend that's our reservoir. And now we're going to draw some streams that lead to the reservoir. You can use the ridges in the paper to help draw those streams. Now, if you want, if you're the creative type, you can also draw a town or some shopping centers, whatever the things you have around your community are that you want to represent in the watershed. But to keep it simple for today, I'm going to go right to drawing the different types of pollution we talked about. I'm going to use my brown to draw some pet waste and farm animal waste. I'm going to use yellow to represent lawn and garden chemicals. I'm going to use aqua to represent fertilizer and pesticides. Looks a little similar to blue. If I had a real green, I would use that instead, but the green at our house got lost. And I could get more colors and do all the different types of pollution we just talked about. Now, just like we did with the watershed model, we are going to spray it with the spray bottle and see what happens. And we're going to pretend it's a really hard rainstorm. Don't be shy. There we go. Now you can see I was right about the low point because that's where the reservoir filled in. And you can also see that some of the pollution types are starting to travel. Look, the pet waste is starting to run into the paper and might eventually end up in the reservoir. Pet waste right there that was right next to the reservoir is drifting right into it. Now you could do this experiment a bunch of times and you would get a different result every time, depending on the different colors and the way your paper crinkled. But just like the watershed model, it shows that pollution moves when rain, wind, and other weather happens. So any pollution that ends up on the ground could have the potential to end up in our water supply. I hope you'll have some fun today, trying the experiment on your own and exploring how watersheds work. This model isn't perfect, but it does show my bottom line. Pollution moves and the land and the water are connected. Any pollution that ends up on our land could end up in our water, whether it runs down the road through a storm drain into the reservoir, or whether it soaks into the ground and ends up in somebody's groundwater well. So take care of the land you live on. Take care of whatever watershed you live in, because clean water affects all of us and is all of our responsibilities. Thank you and have a great afternoon.